get this started. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Jen, for setting this up. This is important. Fortunately, it's not a bed of roses topic to talk about, but it's real. It happens here. It has happened here. It happened last Saturday in the casino in Green Bay. I was working that night. Active shooter situations, armed barricade situations are getting more and more prevalent, and we just have to learn ways to deal with them. How many people here remember fire training in school, way back when you were little? What are the three words they always told you? Everybody remembers that. How many years ago did you hear that? Okay, you don't have to answer. But the reason you remember that is because it got built into your head. Because they were hitting fire drills, hitting fire drills. What do you do in a tornado drill? We're kind of like cover up against a hard wall, find a friendly wall in the structure, away from windows if possible. If you ask all of you, what do you do in an active shooter situation, is there a common answer?
Hide.
Because it wasn't addressed, okay? This training is gonna address some of that. There's no perfect solution for a human problem, but it gives you some solutions, and more than anything, it teaches you how to think a little bit and be responsible for your own personal safety. When something like this happens, we're all adults here. If I was teaching kids, this would be way different. We're gonna be a little more frank the way we talk. You're responsible for your own self-preservation. All right, policies go right down the toilet when something like this happens. You have to think on your feet. That's what we're going to address. I hope. So these pictures are products of training. You can see on the left, that's an elementary school. That was pretty recent, probably 2016 when that picture was taken. That's how those kids in that school are still trained today. Knowing what we know, does that have any effectiveness on ensuring their personal safety if there's a threat? Absolutely not. It's terrible, but unfortunately, probably half the schools in the US still train like that. This picture over on the right was one of the Virginia Tech classrooms the day of their shooting. That's an actual lockdown that they had in their room. And how serious is this if they're still watching something on the PowerPoint that was a presentation in their class while there's an active shooter on their campus, forcing them to barricade? You see kind of like the lack of seriousness there? That's an issue. That's a training start or a lack of training. So, this is research-based. The guy that came up with this was a police officer in Texas. His wife was a principal at a high school. She was coming home talking about their safety protocol. He got really irritated at the lack of any type of useful training. So he got together with some coworkers and created this. I went to this in 2013. Since 2013, to give you an idea, this has been implemented at Bay Area, Stevens National Bank, PCM Credit Union, Vegetable School District, Marinette School District, Kimberly Clark. I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch, but it's really, really heavy area-wide. And the feedback we get is really good with this. There's a couple elements to the training. This is the first one. The second one is actually site-based training, where we go to your workplaces and put you through some thought drills and some action drills, because everyone has a totally different workspace, especially in the city. We all have totally different responsibilities. So let this flow. This is kind of like the timeline of how a lot of this developed. So you can see that this has been a hot topic for a lot of years. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to mitigate a lot of these things that are happening still, because not every place in the United States is adapting to this. Here's some stats. This was 2018, keep in mind. This is 3 years ago. There's over 4,000 law enforcement agencies that teach this. If you look at hospitals, over 1,300 hospitals in the United States, over 950 universities. K to 12, 4,200. I venture to guess that these numbers are probably all up 30, 40% from where they were. But we still have a lot of work to do. To give you some percentages, 31% of US school districts use this right now. That's good, but it's not good enough. That number needs to be way higher. Here's one of the fallacies. It won't happen here. Well, it already did happen here. So we already know that's not true. One of the older presentations has a PIN-DOT map in the United States. We're on there. It does happen. It does happen. It happened here. I was there. A lot of you probably remember that. The eerie part about that is the year, not even a year before that happened, we had a scenario that was identical to that real scenario in a room right across the hallway from the room it took place in. And I still remember stacking up on our tactical team thinking, oh my gosh, this is crazy, we just did this. So it's 2 points there, it's real and training's valuable, I guess is the other point. These are some examples of the businesses, schools, churches, universities, through 2018 where we've had incidences. Too many, way too many. I suppose I should ask, can everybody see this okay? Okay, good. Here's another one. Anybody want to venture to guess? And I gave you a hint in one of the first slides. Why is that not true?
So that they're gathered all in one spot, it takes.
Yeah. Oh, how creative a shooter do you have to be when you have 15 people in an 8 by 12 little rectangle, right? And I mean, physics-wise, bullets don't stop necessarily in the first person they hit, or the third, fourth, or fifth. They go through people, hit other people. And there's some facts with that. In these incidents, every 4 seconds, a shot can be fired, and 50% hits someone. So these are some stats. Look at the time frames and look at the numbers. Happens fast. Before we touch on this slide, what do you think the national average is for law enforcement response time when we get a call of something like this happening? Any guesses?
Under 5.
Under what?
Under 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's 4 to 6 minutes. That's the national average. I venture to guess here, usually we'd be a little quicker than that, but here's the issue with that stat that they don't talk about. That's response time. That's not mitigation time. They're two totally different things. Let's use this building as an example. Let's say we get a 911 call, we're at the PD, that there's an active shooter in this room. We get here in 1 minute and 45 seconds. What if, while we're driving here, the shooting stops, the shooter's on the other side of the plant, and everything's quiet? All we know is there's an active shooter in the meeting. So we come here, we address this room, and there's nothing going on. What happens then? Now you've got a slow, deliberate search because you have no idea what's going on in the building. So did we mitigate it in 1 minute 40? We got to the building in 1 minute 40. It might be 10, 15 minutes until we mitigate it. That's a long, long, long time. This slide, I'm kind of a stat geek with training. This is really, really valuable. Bear with me on this because it's kind of technical, but I think you'll see the value in it. This is Virginia Tech, second floor of one of the buildings where the shooting happened. It's really rare to have an incident we could study that had the same shooter on the same day with a bunch of different classrooms who all did different things and then get the results. So that shows the value in this. He came in from the left, the top left room. There was nobody there, so there was no casualties. He hit room 211, and you can see by the bar, red is really not good, green is good. You can see the casualty rate was extremely high in that room. All they did was they laid down on the floor. And in fact, we talked to one of the only survivors from that classroom, and she said that they heard the shots. Her teacher walked to an open door just like this and looked, came back, her face was white, walked over to her desk, grabbed her phone and started calling 911, didn't say anything to anybody, didn't close the door, much less lock it. And then he walked in, so it was a bloodbath. The room on the top middle, same thing, they laid down on the floor, didn't lock the door, didn't create a barricade, anything like that. Center bottom room, they barricaded after he came in once and left. So their casualty count is still pretty high. They saved 2 people in that room. Top right, remember, this is second floor. The professor barricaded the door with some items in his own body, and they jumped out of the second floor window. They experienced some pretty heavy injuries, ankles, knees, hips. However, look at the survival rate. 14 people lived to talk about it. The bottom right is really interesting because, and I'd love to know who was in that room that day or what training they had or didn't have, but what they did was they took a big table, not this big, but like a rectangle table, think inward opening door, they kicked the table up this way, laid on the floor and light pressed it against the door, and then stacked up stuff on that table. The shooter was pretty diligent. He put a magazine of rounds through the door, thinking, well, I can't get in, I'm still gonna catch somebody with these. And the door was riddled with bullets, but everyone was on the floor and they were safe. No casualties. So I'm still really curious to see if that was just instinct or if they knew something that no one else did. But you can see the difference in action and reaction and casualty rate is really extreme. So a lot of this training, and I kind of touched on it before, is very proactive. Like when we teach us in the schools, how many people have kids in the Marinette Michigan School District? Okay. So this is what they learned at a different level, and depending on what they learn is what age they are. But when we started doing this, the teachers, for example, were very policy driven. If A happens, we do B in very, very linear. That's really not how life works in a human incident like this. We taught them that they are responsible for their classroom. They're accountable for their classroom, and they got to live with the decisions they make, not what someone else tells them they should do on a piece of paper. And sometimes that's a tough one to swallow in some organizations, but it's real. That's just how it is. Every event is not the same. You can't plan for one of these perfectly because none of them are perfect. We're not perfect. And probably the most important thing about this is Alice is not sequential. We'll cover what the acronym means in a little bit. But in law enforcement, it's the same way. We have use of force guidelines, but you don't react to a shooting by talking to someone and telling them to stop. There's force has got a parallel danger in a nutshell. Reaction's got a parallel force. So that's why this is really important, and we'll cover that. And it's research-based. I watch a lot of video of post-school shootings where they show the hallway movement of the shooter, and you study what they do. They're cowards. If they wanted to fight, they go to a military base or a law enforcement place and fight with us. They go to a school or a church or a movie theater. They don't want a confrontation. They want victims. They want to control the narrative. They're sick people. The A means alert. Across the city, I was kind of thinking about this. Every place is a little bit different as far as what kind of capabilities we have to communicate with each other. The schools have PAs that work usually. What we found out is sometimes not everyone knows how to even turn them on or use it. That's a problem. Or they've got a phone that opens up communication, then we ask the teachers, what's the code? And they're like, they didn't know. That's a problem. What's probably going to work quicker than anything, and kind of the clues right there, is what human sense is the most sensitive for startle, which reaction, and movement. You want to venture to guess? Auditory. Okay. And I think that's just primal. When we're sleeping, we're vulnerable. I think it was designed that way. But you know what the ambient sounds sound like in your workplace every day, every night. You also know what doesn't sound normal. And everybody here has experienced something where what was that? That's not right. That's what you're going to hear in an incident like this. You might not hear the gunshots. You might hear the first couple people that see the shooter walking on the sidewalk coming in. What's important is to transmit that. We'll show a video in a little bit where there wasn't a warning given. Someone saw a crazy threat and didn't tell anybody. That's really dangerous. So this is really, really important to share that. That auditory cue is really, really important. This one's big with us. You know, we're notorious for using code language, 10 codes. Fire has some codes that they use. I would say about 10, 12 years ago, we really shifted how we talk, not only to each other, but to other agencies. Plain English, okay? We don't use code words because what's gonna happen under stress, someone's gonna say, what does green mean? What does red mean? That's not the time to figure out what the color means or the code word means. Plain English. You know, if you're in your workplace and someone said, there's a guy with an effing gun, that's not normal language. That's a problem. That gets your attention. And that's how we should talk to each other. Within your organization, training, documents, and drills, they're important. Emergency plan documents are important. But ask yourself, if this happens, is anybody going to go look for the binder to see what they do? Not going to happen. You got to move. And then with external partners, law enforcement and public safety, that's why I'm here, so we can talk about this, because our role in this is totally different than your role. You know, we're often called first responders. We're not. You guys are the first responders in an active shooter incident. We're secondary. You saw those timelines more often than not. These are mitigated by you guys, the shooter themselves, and once in a while us. That's reality. So take a look at hopefully this works. That's an ER waiting room. This is kind of the back office where the administrative staff and other staff work.
What do you got? Who?
Be quiet.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Okay?
40 seconds in.
I can hear you. Keep talking. Everybody here. Please. Anybody else? I can hear you. Keep talking. What? What do you want? What? What?
Cold Silver is the ER. Cold Silver is the ER.
What'd you guys hear at the end there? Code what?
Silver.
What's code silver? What else? 40 seconds in. Really quiet there, right? There was somebody that started to open up some verbalization with somebody. We still don't really know what the problem is, right? Don't know. And there's no communication, even in this back room. Did you see that copper come in there? He's kind of like, what's going on? Nobody knows what's going on. He doesn't know what silver is, for sure. This is what that first girl saw when she ran away. Got a pistol in each hand. There's a 40 seconds or a silence light. So what do you see there? Minute 36 is when the shooting happened. Minute 39 is when you heard Coach Silver in the back. What's wrong with that? I'd venture to say that if that guy has any skills and ammunition with him, if he would have walked in that back, he would have shot every person in there in 15 or 20 seconds, or had the opportunity to at least. And no one would have known he was there. No one would have known he was armed. That's not the type of information we in here want to get, right? That's why there's a really high value on the alert function. I guess I should touch on this a little bit too. There's some psychology in violence. There's a predator-prey relationship. That guy, you can tell by his body language, was coming in there to intimidate, scare, probably hurt or kill people. He's only thinking of one thing: hurting people. If you disrupt his thought process by a distraction, a counter, contrast, aggression, anything like that, you just at least double what he's got to think about, and what does thinking make everyone do? Slow down, right? You took him out of his game plan. Nobody took him out of his game plan. He was in complete control until that officer came in the front door. That's not what we want. So the L analysis lockdown, this shows a barricade that they're making in the school. Barricading is really important, and I'll tell you why in a second. But notice the second bullet point, that is really, really in contrast with tradition. It's spread out within the room with counter devices. Look for alternative escape routes. You got 3 of them right there. Dial 911 when it's safe to do so, okay? I'll tell you that the last thing you want to do, and picture this scenario, let's say there was a domestic that happened at home, spouse comes to school or work, knows what room other spouse is in, so they've got a reason to get in that room. Everything's quiet, the door's locked, the barricade's built, lights are off, and all of a sudden they hear a cell phone ring. Oh, there are people in there, right? Really important. I know it's actually a complex motor skill when you're under stress, turning your phone ringer off. It's huge, really important. And then first aid supplies. Anybody know what an improvised first aid supply could be? I mean, there's a bunch of them, but volunteers? Tourniquets. What can you make a tourniquet out of?
Extension cord.
Yeah, there's a bunch laying right there, belts, stuff like that. The other thing, phone books, traditional paper phone books. Let's see your kid up here, open side in towards the wound, direct pressure, paper absorbs liquid. Okay, you need to slow bleeds, and direct pressure with any type of paper product, a blanket, anything like that is really critical. Because going back to our response time, let's just say something happened in here, and it's 12, 13 minutes maybe, until you see a paramedic. How long is 12 minutes when you've got an arterial bleed? It's a lifetime. That's a lifetime, okay? So you've got to start thinking about what's available to you, and I'm not talking about Band-Aids and stuff like that, like for real, like when you have that you could use with direct pressure. And I'm not trying to gross anybody out, but blood's really slippery at first. Sometimes it's really hard to find the source of a bleed. It's really tough, it's messy. So you have to start to think about things like that, because it might be several minutes until you see a medic. So barricading the door, see how they're doing that? Other things to do to barricade the door, like this is an upward opening door. I'll give you an example. For inward opening doors, we have, they make these aluminum door kicks with like a black rubberized bottom. They're really nice. If this was an inward opening door, you kick those in there, and they actually make them, some of them are so good that you're not gonna get that door open, and you have to drive them out with a hammer and a screwdriver from the other side because they're so tight. An outward opening door, this is a little bit different, okay? Because now they've got an advantage. They can pull that open. There's some other issues here we'll talk about in a minute. But what could I do with a belt with this handle standing where I am? Yeah. Could loop the belt across here, or double up the cord, loop it, grab it, and create tension this way. Is that defeatable? Sure, everything is. But what does it buy you a little bit of? Time. Yeah. And if you're working with me and I'm right here, you should have that chair leaned up against this wall, ready to nail somebody with that if they come in. It's always what's next. You always have to be thinking of what's next. The other thing too is when we watch those videos of them going through hallways in schools, unless they're focused on that one individual in that room, they're looking for victims because they know their clock is running, they know we're coming. And I've I've seen this, they'll literally walk in full doors, they're walking like frantic, trying to find the unlocked door, trying to find it. So just locking the door is a really good idea, but if they look through this window and they see tables and chairs and all this stuff piled up, but there's 6 more doors down the hall, guess where they're going? They want easy targets, because we're gonna be there in a couple minutes, they don't wanna get hung up on this, so you're buying yourself time. The spreading out in the room is important. We call it the laser rule. So if you look at that door, think about that for a second. If you've got a shooter there, we always tell people if you can see the door with your eyes, you can get shot through the eyes. It's really, really critical. So you try to have to move yourself where you can't see the door. This is really hard with kids, especially little kids. When we did the training in the schools, they want to see the police come check their barricade. So they build up their stuff. We look through the door, and there you see Johnny and Susie going like this, looking at you. No, you can't do that. So the teachers have to say, all right, we need to do this instead. But imagine this as a teacher or as a parent. Imagine a 3rd grade teacher saying, hey, today we're going to do a drill. We want to make the biggest pile of junk in front of the door that we can, or even go. The kids love doing that. They're like, yeah, we can make a mess, and they just pile stuff. Seen it happen. But that's how they're training stuff. In here, the example I gave with me and her is, I'm gonna try to secure this door and pile stuff in front of it, and she's getting ready to hit it. That's reality. A lot of offices, classrooms, start to reorganize how they do things once we talk to them. For instance, those big rolling bookcases, I think there's a picture later, with big casters on it. The teachers have gone to putting those next to their doors, so they can roll in front of the doors. Another thing they do is, the little cleats on a boat that you tie off your anchor rope or dock to? Now those are mounted like this, here. And those are hall pass hangers to keep code people happy. Those are for putting belts and cords in the door. If you go in a classroom and see one, that's from them going to training. Super important. So these are a variety of different doors, office doors. Any guesses why so many doors, especially in schools, have windows on them?
So they can absorb students mostly.
Yeah, it's so the principal and staff can come in, make sure everything's okay in the classroom without disrupting the classroom, without actually having to walk in. But what does that create? A problem? Even if this had a lock, you just break the window and reach in and unlock it, right? It's an issue. So what the schools did, they couldn't permanently block that window, and they didn't want to pay for new doors, so they put down drop-down shades. And if something happens, that's one of the steps they do. They hit the shades as they're turning off the lights and locking the door. Again, that's to make that room a harder target, something that takes too long. Because if the person can't even see what's in the room and it's quiet, they don't really know who might be in there. So that's why they're doing that. These are some pictures from Columbine, Sandy Hook, Hastings, and Red Lake. You can see on the right, top right, obviously the glass is really defeatable. The other problem too is you can see through it. And there's always a balance between like a warm, friendly atmosphere and a institutionalized atmosphere with solid doors, but they offer different advantages. So these are some examples of barricades built. You can see that pile of chairs. Honest question, can that be shot through and hit somebody? Sure. But if you're the shooter looking in there, is that an accessible target really? And I can tell you from personal experience, this happened to me at the middle school. We're on the 2nd floor, they built something similar to that, and I had a squirt gun. And I figured what wall they'd be on. Imagine coming in here, I figured they're down in this corner. So they have a door where I can get it open about this far. I've got a water pistol. And I'm thinking, well, I'm at least gonna try to get somebody, let's see if they're huddled too close together. I stuck my arm through the door. The door got slammed on my arm. They all attacked me. It looked like a cat attacked my arm. The squirt gun got broken to pieces. And I've got my arm on, I'm like, holy, whatever. During the debrief, they're like, hey, we're really sorry, we kind of overreacted. I said, no, you didn't. That was perfect. That's what you're supposed to do. And it's the same idea with that. If somebody ventures to get a gun, arm, hand, whatever through that mess, you're on to counter. You can attack the arm, attack the weapon. That's what you do. It gives you an opportunity. Same thing with here, there's an example of a bookcase, you know, they're trying to slide it in front of the door, and that's good. But imagine if that was a cart with casters or something like that, or a heavy desk, that they could just push from the other end, because she's exposed right there, really bad. It's better than doing nothing, but there's different ways to get there. There's those carts I was talking about. Imagine those full of books, that's heavy, like heavy, heavy, heavy. Those casters have brakes on them, those little kick brakes. Imagine if those were next to a classroom door, and you could unlock that and just slide it in front of the door. That's a good plan right there. You know, and a lot of the schools have those, some way, shape, or form. That's how they store the books they aren't using during the curriculum. So there's a cool story behind this. This is Kent State University. The guy who came to Marinette to teach us this is a lieutenant at that university police department. The classroom of kids, 2 hours before this, had active shooter training, same one you're sitting in. Then they had an active shooter that night on campus. 2 hours that they had the training. I hope I'm not jinxing anybody, but this is what happened. That's their barricade. And you can see they flipped all the tables up like we talked about, and they've got stuff tied off. If you see up here where the circles are, everything is like triangulated. That's really good. And that's with the 2 hour training. The thing about this is interesting is their teacher told them to turn off the lights and huddle in the corner. College students said, "Yeah, not gonna happen today, we're gonna go do this." And this is the picture they got of it. They took this on their cell phones and sent it to the trainer that trained me and said, "Hey, look what we did tonight." That's pretty cool. And that's with no practical training. That's just saying, "Hey, remember that PowerPoint we just did?" And they're all safe. Really, really simple methods. Look at the bar on the top. You could also do that with a belt. You could do that with a tie, a cord. How many doors do we have in city facilities that open out like that with those springs? That really limits the travel of that door. On the right, you can see that. It's like a 2x6, a couple $4 ratchet straps from Menards. That takes a lot to open that door, a lot. Imagine pulling that from the backside. It's not gonna happen. And the eerie part about it is the Virginia Tech shooting, this works both ways. That's exactly what he did to the doors of that school building, but he used chains with padlocks on them. So it's really effective and it doesn't cost much. And really how intrusive does that look if the corner under that light switch, there's a board laying there with a ratchet strap in the ground? Doesn't look dangerous, doesn't look violent. There's a reason it's there though. So inform. I kind of talked about this before. Passing on real-time information is important. Here's what comes into us. It's really important to let us know when it's safe for you to do so, what you saw. Most of these, 98% of these are done by one person. So statistics are on our side there. If you see someone coming in, you get out. If you see someone outside, you get in. The important part is if you can identify what kind of weapon they have. If they have a long gun, we're gonna act a little bit different than if it's a pistol. Also, if they're full of body armor, that's really important to know too, because that changes, I'm not trying to be gross, but that changes where we're gonna hit them a lot. That's super important. The PA systems, we'll touch on this in a second, but that person operating that PA system puts themselves in a predicament, because if they're passing on information, they're also making themselves a target. The middle school has a safe room, which is really nice, where a person can be on the cameras, able to transmit who's going where, and they can do it safely without having to worry about becoming a target. That's huge. Otherwise, you'd have somebody in the school office saying, again, go back to real English language, hey, there's a shooter on the second floor by the science lab. There's a shooter thinking, where is that person talking? I'm gonna go find them. You know what I mean? So they put themselves in a bind. It's kind of dangerous. And radios. Some of us in the city have radios, some don't. That's an asset. I know how loud it can get back here. You know, DPW can get loud. Those guys working with a lot of the ambient noise, and Kimberly Clark was a really good example, they can't hear anything. So in the factory, what they did is they installed these really bright strobe lights about 12 feet up in the air in all the common view corners, that no matter what they're doing in the workspace, they see that they're like, what? Oh, that's what that's for. Because otherwise they'd never hear a warning. It's not gonna happen. This is that announcer position I was talking about. Like I said, If you can do that safely, that's awesome. We've done some stuff at the middle school with the person, Matt Hansen, talking where the threat is. It's awesome to be law enforcement because then you're gone, we know where they are. If that's not a safe room, not only is that person in danger, but what else could happen? We did this in a scenario in Peshtu. I was kind of mean when we did this. We had the office secretary saying where the threat was, and the threat wasn't there. Because if this is a two-person operation and they take control of that, they're gonna direct the shooter to more victims. You guys follow me on that? So it's pretty dangerous. That's why this position is kind of double-edged sword. It can't be done right, it should be done at all. So counter. This is where age-specific stuff really ranges all over the place. It's not fighting. This has nothing to do with fighting. What it is taking back control. I touched on this before. Shooters are about control. They don't want a confrontation. They don't want to fight, or they went to pick the targets they did. And it's personal choice. You know, not everybody is wired for combatives. Not everybody is wired to hurt another human being, and that's perfectly okay. But I'll delve into some history here, some primal stuff with all this. If you think about it, none of us would be in this room if our ancestors weren't the most fit and strong of their generations, because way back when they would have died from elements of nature, wild animal attacks, other people killing. So really genetically, we're the offspring of the best earlier breeds of people. That's how we are. Culture has taken some of that away from us. Some of us don't really delve into that very much, but when you get into psychology and combatives, it's there. Every one of us is a survival organism. Every one of us is able to heal and do things like that. We're unique. But unless you tap into that, you don't know what's there. The teachers, this was a good example. Tim Bannock was the superintendent when they implemented ALICE. And when we got to this, he's like, oh, how are we gonna get the teachers to really get physically violent? I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't think they're gonna be able to do it. I said, oh, that's easy. He said, what are we gonna do? I said, we're gonna go up on the stage. I said, and I'm gonna present the threat, and you're gonna do a double leg takedown on me as hard as you can right in front of me. He looks at me, he laughs. I said, I'm serious. He's like, I gotta do that? I said, yeah, you're the boss. If they see you do it, they'll do it. And he was not comfortable. He said, all right, whatever. Well, we're talking 300 people. He nailed me, just dropped me like a bad habit. And you could hear, oh my gosh, they saw the boss do it. But you know what happened in the first scenario after that? They did it. Because all of a sudden there's permissions opened up in there. Well, he's the boss, he does it. That means we can do it. So I guess what I'm getting at, violence is a lot of permission-based things. You have to give yourself permission up here to hurt another human being, or you won't when you need to. I know that's kind of complex, but it's very, very true. Age appropriateness, would we teach a third grader to do this with somebody? Probably not. But what's in the classroom? Books, pens, backpacks, water bottles. Those are counter devices. We had at Park School, one of the guys, he was actually a wrestler for Coleman. And we picked him out on purpose. He was kind of the alpha guy in the group. We gave him a water gun and a pair of safety glasses. We gave the teachers, who were the students in the scenario, like weightless wiffle balls. Not gonna hurt anybody. And we said, all right, you're gonna go in that room and shoot as many people as you can with the water gun. And he smiled, he's like, all right, it's gonna be awesome. We told the teachers, nail him with those things and run. You know how many times he hit people with the water gun? He got one person in the elbow. Because the first thing that happened, he came in, remember predator-prey mindset? Boy, I'm gonna own the situation, I'm running this, I'm in control of this. He got nailed with wiffle balls, none of which were gonna hurt him, but it disrupted his shooting platform, and it made him startle flash. So he comes in all dominant, all of a sudden he's doing this, and he's trying to find targets, and they're hammered up, and all of a sudden it clears up and they're gone. The look on his face was crazy. He's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I said, wait a minute now, those are wiffle balls. What if those were staplers, paperweights on stuff, chairs, and you could just see it hit him. He's like, all right, I get this now, I understand. So it's age appropriate, but there's always things you can do, no matter how old or young someone is. And this is what I was talking about, interrupting the process of shooting accurately. Anybody that's shot before, pistols especially, those are all just some elements in that. And really to hit a target, those all come into play. If you disrupt one of those, you really change the balance of shooting and target acquisition. If you disrupt a whole bunch of those, you really, really make it difficult to hit a target. Numerous moving targets. What happens to your brain? You have a hard time picking. That's time. You're trying to create time. Create time and disrupt the balance of the shooter. Really important. And I joke about this all the time, but why do shooters have such a higher hit rate than we do? And I always joke because we suck, right? But realistically, it's kind of what I talked about, and it's what you've seen before. I don't necessarily agree with their skill level being low. I don't think that's true, because when we do research, a lot of them have training. Go to range, they can shoot, but people congregate in tight groups, and they sit still. And again, these guys have that predator mindset. They go in, 3-4 rounds in a group of 20 people are probably gonna hit at least 10. And that's what they're doing, that's why the hit rate is so high. We come to mitigate these, our targets are moving around, we're moving around. So you have two moving elements and there's bullets flying. That's really, really hard to hit accurately. But that's realistic. And look at the differences, over 50 for the bad guys, under 30 for us, that's a huge disparity. I'll let you look through that. We talk about the auto loop a lot. And these are some of the things and how they're interrupted. Like the story I told you about the teacher with the water gun. Those were all affected, he was affected by all of those. It's really, really important. You know, and like I said, again, too, the realization of those were wiffle balls that would never hurt him still affected him psychologically and physiologically where he couldn't hit targets. So, does everybody remember the President Reagan assassination attempt? So before we watch this is the Secret Service, who arguably does more dignitary protection than any other group in the world. Remember that swarm picture of those teachers that had that person kind of wrestle to the ground and counter? Watch these guys. Highest trained guys in the world. Ah.
Sense, Henry. Put you here in the middle of the mountain.
Motor skills going on there? That's a swarm. They did the exact same thing to that shooter that we teach the teachers to do to their shooters. It's identical. It's the same thing. They're armed and they're looking for what's next. You see those guys kind of like trying to hold the perimeter outwards, like who's the next threat? That's elevated training, but none of that is complex motor skill. It's just not. So try to follow these dots and count those. It's the test, make sure nobody fails. This is what happens in your mind. And I've experienced this as a bad guy in simulation training, trying to hit officers when they come through the door. This is what happens when your mind's trying to pick a target. targets. And then you have 25 of them at the end, all at once. You're trying to identify a target and address it. It's really hard. Now add things coming your way, getting thrown through the air. It all just compounds. Trying to make life really difficult for these people. Evacuates the Ian Ellis. Remember I said it wasn't a linear reaction before? This is one that we like to talk about because, give you the Marinette High School as an example. If the teachers have reliable information that a shooter's in the gym and they're way on the other end of the school, is there any use in them not leaving? Right? Before, no matter where you were, no matter where the threat was, you locked up. It's not like that anymore. Now there's some independence given to those people, and same in industry around here. Make a decision. You know, if you know where they are, and even if you can see them, if they're way down the hallway and they're encountering people down there, and you've got a door right here, get out. It's really simple. Get out. And everyone's heard the run, hide, fight that the FBI proposed. That's great, but where do you run? How do you hide? How do you fight? They didn't fill in the blanks. When you run, don't run in a straight line. Move around, okay? And as you run, put as many solid things you can between where you ran from and where you're going. That includes cars, trees, buildings. I mean, think if we were gonna run out this door and take off that way down Water Street, put a couple houses and a couple trees between you and the place you left. That's what you're trying to do. Don't take a car. There's a lot of reasons for this, but has anybody ever tried to really get in your car with a key or hit your unlock button when you're really under stress? Guess how small that key, that unlock button gets? This big. It doesn't work under stress. The other thing, what if you all try to leave at once? Now we have a collision and a crash. People's cars are inoperable and you're gonna get shot in your car. Or, when law enforcement goes in and you have this car just screaming out of you, who might that be? To us. Shooter, right? Doesn't work. What's happened in big shooting scenes like the schools, guess what the kids do in the classroom? Text their mom and dad. Hey, I'm in class 132, you gotta get here right now. So now there's 200 parents in vehicles that just come in. Now law enforcement has got to park down by 9th Street because all the parents are in between the threat and law enforcement. And EMS has got to park by Main and Water because they're a mile away because there's no room to get there. So the cars are a big, big problem. Huge problem. This touches that too. Remove need for parents to come to scene. Doesn't help. It doesn't help because we don't know who's who. You know, those kids, those people are told when they come outside and they encounter law enforcement, make sure we can see your hands. Because one of the shootings in Florida, a shooter engaged in the school, walked right back out with the other kids and walked to the second place. He had a gun on him. He's walking like everybody else because he knew he was going to go to the staging area where all the other kids were so we could get him another shooting. We don't know who parents are, who's friendly, who's not. And what if you have a well-minded parent who's armed, comes to one of these, and we are clearing this building, and all of a sudden you got a 40-year-old male walking through the school with a pistol in his hand. Guess who's going to get shot? We don't know who they are, and we don't have time to decipher all that. We know we have a school shooting, and there's the gun. We covered this at Kimberly Clark. A couple of the guys had really fair questions, like, hey, you know, I carry in my car. What if I go out and get my gun and I come back in? Well, I don't know who you are. You know, there's 200 people there. I don't know everybody. And then they said, well, what if we're wearing our safety vests at work? I said, what if it's an internal threat? What if you work here and you're the gunman? We don't know who's friend or foe. And presenting a weapon to an unknown person in an already hot situation is really, really dangerous to everybody, but especially that parent. Really dangerous. Adults is a little bit different, but rally points. Obviously, you guys have to run from your workplace. You don't care when you're going to report back. You're going to get somewhere safe, and we'll figure it out later. But imagine how the teachers deal with this. That's really tough for them to try to keep everybody in the group and then try to account for everybody later. And it's a struggle. But they have go bags. They basically have like on their hall pass hook, they have a bag with a roster for that day that they change every day. And they usually have some first aid stuff. Maybe they'll have like a water bottle or something like that, and usually they'll have like a phone call list for the parents. Because a lot of the kids are going to go home or make their way home, and the teachers aren't going to know. Show you a couple of clips. Just want to cover a few things more. bring this up for a reason. And I touched on it a little bit before. What if it happens in here, we mitigate it, everybody's okay, what do we do with the gun? Do you have any ideas? The shooter's gone. Please don't show us the gun when we get here. The best thing to do probably, take this, roll it right over it, put it on the floor, garbage can. Turn over the garbage can on top of the gun, sit on the garbage can, and we get here saying, hey, there's a gun under this can. Because, I mean, I worked in the city a long time, there's still people that I might look at it, their stress and say, I don't know who that is, you know what I mean? Cover it with the garbage can. Take a blanket, throw it over it, and then stand next to there and say, hey, there's a gun under here. You know, bad guys right there, hurting, there's the gun. Really, really important, because we don't want friendly fire. Again, can you imagine walking in, classroom's done great, you guys saved your own butts, bad guys in the hurt locker, police are coming, everything's gonna be fine, and then we have a shootout because we don't know who's got a gun. It's a horrible ending. So, just to touch on that 2% thing again too. Columbine was one of the only events that had more than one person, thankfully. The other one was the Boston Marathon, two brothers, Sarnoff brothers, I think their name was. They were involved. So statistically, probability-wise, if you see the shooter, that's most likely the only threat. So your actions should be based on what you know is the majority. Okay. Don't over-guess these. Don't say, well, what if? Well, I know that, so I'm going to do that. You're way safer doing that. Otherwise, you're going to get analysis paralysis. And what are the two terms you always hear when you encounter something that you're not psychologically prepared to deal with? It's supposed to start with F. Fight or flight. What's the third one that everyone forgets about, never gets covered? Freeze. Yeah. Everyone says fight or flight. Those are the minority. Freeze is the majority. We see freeze every day at work. Freeze is what happens when your brain gets a stimulus that happens so fast, there's not a template for acting, and it says, what do I do with that? And you see people do this all the time. Usually it's right after a startle flinch, and they just don't do anything. We see it on video all the time. And that can be mitigated by training, by filling in some of those blanks mentally. And your brain's really neat the way you train, because you can learn something really slow, really, really slow, but you can recall it really, really fast. And you can replicate it physically really fast. I always say it's like learning the CD drive in your head, but the information's got to be in there. Super important. So that freeze thing is what training tries to overcome. It happens in sports, it happens in life, it happens in stress, violence, everywhere. It's reality. So I just want to show you this map. So, if a shooter comes in on A, and this is your campus in the middle, you know, that's a pretty good chunk of land right there. Think of all the possible opportunities you have for evacuation. Look at some things where you go. You know, you've got some wood lines there, you've got a lot of structure, big structures. You've got a lot of big parking lots too, where you got clear line of sight. But what is there not a lot of on the circumference of it? Think pavement. Yeah. So imagine if all those little arteries getting into that campus get blocked by parents coming, people trying to leave, and EMS is parked down here, and you've got to bleed 40 acres away, 10 buildings away. You see a problem with that? That's what I was talking about with evacuation. That's a really, really bad day, and this is an overhead map of one of them where it happened. Literally, there was, where you see on the top of it, this Collins Boulevard, that's where the SWAT team had to park to come try to figure this out, because every single road was blocked. Or like this little blip. So here's some statistics for you to digest a little bit. Look at the percentages on the right Those are the resolutions. In other words, 46% of these are resolved by citizens and police. 40% were resolved by suicide or the shooter. Okay, so half and half. And what's that 40% of the shooter again? That's their narrative. They're in control. They want to run this like they want. They want to end this like they want. And you don't want confrontation. So think about that a little bit. Do you want to let them control the narrative? I wouldn't. You know they don't want confrontation, and you know that you double or triple their time for acting because their thinking takes so long, and you give them more to think about. There's a value in doing something. Look at that top one. That's really, really important. This was through 2018. Victims are resolving this 2.5 more times than we do. That's a lot. And look at right below it. When we have to resolve it, look how much higher the fatality rate is. It's because all that time went by. How come you never hear about that in the media? How come the media doesn't have victim resolved active shooter incidents on the front page? We sell them violence. What they usually do and talk about is that the shooter wants notoriety. They want attention. They want their name right there saying, this is what I did. And the scary part is they study previous shooters. They find this stuff when they do search warrants at these people's houses, that they've got all these clippings and walls of prior shooters, and they want to beat their count. They want to get a higher body count. It's eerie the more you learn about these guys. So this is just all factual stuff. This is victim resolve results. Look how high the casualty count is when people wait for us to be the first responders. Way too high. These are some publications, a few of those were touched on before. But I mean, 2008, they were talking about this really, really heavy. That was a long time ago already. 2009. There's where run, hide, fight start to come in pretty heavy. All these publications are online too. We use these, like when we deal with the schools, we give them examples of other schools that have adapted. So these are the little blips that we dig these up for these presentations. This is all you're gonna get. A little internet blip of a student, teacher, or combination of both. That's stock piece. And I think the media's getting a little better. They're still not. So what's the message then? If we never learn that these are mitigated by civilians, we just keep learning that, hey, these shootings keep happening and the police keep dealing with it and people keep dying. That's the recurrent message. It's like a bad skip on a CD instead of reality. And when, the second part of this training is where we go to your workplaces and give you some scenarios to tackle mentally, physically, think about stuff and say, what am I going to do? You know, depending on the environment you're in, some of you are really, really well prepared with stuff to throw. Some of you have really good exit strategies and ways to get out. Talking about these windows before, I was at a credit union, and this kind of hits the policy thing too when the training starts, but we're talking about getting out the window, and you know, I told them to grab an office chair and break the window and exit. Well, how many people really can grab a chair like this? This is a light one actually. Grab one of these, get it parallel to the ground, and start breaking the window. Some of these are really heavy, right? So if you go in some of those places I was talking about, you're gonna see a steel folding chair, just kind of tucked away in the wall along the side, and that's for overflow. seating. That's not what it's there for. It's for breaking the window. Taking this folding chair and closing it, and then using it the long way is way easier and way more effective to break that glass than this is. Those are round wheels, that's a steel bar, and that's way easier to wield. When we teach them how to rake a window, start at a low corner, break it, and just try to remove circumference. People say, well, I'll get cut if I jump out the window. Hey, you might get shot if you stay here. Would you rather have? And you know, a lot of them will have their chairs, and they'll have an extra heavy coat that's just there all the time. That's what they throw to the window so when they go out. I was asked in one of those places from someone, well, aren't we gonna get in trouble if we break the window? And I looked around, I'm like, who's the boss here? Just kind of like this. I said, can you answer that, please? And she's like, no, you're not gonna get in trouble. But what's the mindset there? It's, well, our policy says we can't damage company property, and I'm breaking the window. All that goes out the window. This is totally different. But some of that mindset is there that we have to overcome. Opening our minds to options. And you can only do that through training. These are, some of you probably have questions that hit on these. I'll let you look at that list. So 98% of the time there's only one shooter. Could you run into the shooter? Oh yeah, for sure. And what are some things that might be important when you do encounter that person? Think about it, we kind of cover this stuff. Movement, right? Noise, throwing things, putting solid things between you and them. What if it's a bathroom stall and you're perched on the porcelain and that door opens and they're right there? What are we doing right now? Fighting, right? And I tell you the one golden rule about a gunfight, there's one part of the gun that's gonna hurt you. It's the hole at the end. All you have to think about, and all you should be thinking about, is keeping that hole away from you. You know, people can teach gun disarms and gun defense all day long, and everyone's got a different theory. And when you watch this stuff on video, you got guys that have done that repetition 15,000 times, and they have a role player that's going like this. Is that realistic? No. They look like a rock star because they've done it so many times, and they have a very, very passive role player. In a real fight, it's messy. There's stuff flying all over. Nobody looks like they're trained. You watch our videos, you watch MMA guys that get in fights in bars, and you watch them fight, like, no way is that Conor McGregor, because I've seen him fight. He doesn't fight like that. But we're not in the ring now. Now we're in a bar. Everybody's half jigged up. Everybody's stressed. Everybody's got adrenaline in them. And everything goes out the window. Okay, so regular fights can be the same way. They're sloppy. But for that gun thing, you're in that bathroom stall and it happens right there, keep the muzzle away from you. That's what you have to focus on. So this accountability thing, not so important for this group. But let's talk about this group. Let's say everybody's just gone. Who in the city is gonna take the lead role as checking in every single employee who might have been potentially involved to make sure everyone's A, okay, and B, is gonna have their needs met later? Because there are gonna be some PTSD issues, probably. I mean, does that fall in your Jen, for that?
With lighting yourself and the mayor and stuff.
Okay. All right.
So, when I worked in the Army, we had a first response team, and we did something similar to this, but for fires. So we had to have monthly fire drills, and we had a checkpoint for every department that they had a need at a certain point. And the person that was in charge of that department had a list of employees, and it was their responsibility on any given day to know who was at work, who was not at work. You know, if there's a fire, you want to know if somebody's in the building. Can we have something set up for this that, you know, should there be, and maybe tie it with fire? If there's an active shooter, active, you know, fire, a checkout point somewhere else that we notify people, yes, these people are accounted for, so that you don't have one person trying to track down 100 people.
Well, it's a fair question, but here's a couple things with that. What if the threat's internal? Okay, what if it's somebody that knows where the city employees go during an active shooter? Okay, the other thing is the fire department, and I forgot to bring this up and I apologize, but some of these incidents, people hold the fire alarm. Do you want a bunch of firefighters coming to an active shooter thinking it's a fire? No. Okay. And the other thing with the rally point, the only thing I would caution against with that is That's a preset procedure for a volatile event that really can't be predicted. And the thing that scares me about that is not only just the internal part, but it's that fixation on maybe, well, I need to get back here, could override where they really should be going. It's the only thing that scares me, and that's what the other instructors I've heard say too, is that really be cautious about locking into it. When this happens, we do this.
What if we set up a call number for employees to call
That's
when
what-
they're safe?
That's what people do. Yeah, they check in, call, text, email, saying, hey, I'm fine, I'm here. Because I think that notion of corralling people somewhere is really, really starting to go away for a lot of good reasons. A lot of schools used to have kids go in the playground and line up against a fence. You just created a 180-degree barrier there that they can't leave now if something happens. So a lot of this has gone to just scatter, really, really scatter far and wide. Liability, we're all adults here. You know, there is no policy that can address, hey, you have to do this with an active shooter. You're saving your own skin. That's what this comes down to. The schools, this is a really tough one for them, is how to address special ed needs. They've actually moved a lot of things around as far as where we put groups of kids based on who is able to be moved and who isn't. I know the first time we brought this up, the schools were like, oh, this is never gonna work. And they accommodated it. They did what they could. But it's really tough. When we did training at the hospital, we simulated a floor that was underway. We had a whole variety of like nurses, patient role players, whatever. And we actually had a sub gun, a 223 with blanks. And it was so loud in there that there was dust coming off the tiles. And the nurses really struggle with, hey, I'm treating a patient who's incapable of moving themselves. What do? Do I move with them? Do I secure them in place and run? Or do we secure the place? And the hospital, I think, looked at that and said, we can't really give you a policy on that. You have to make a decision. Well, that's a big decision to make for a nurse or a doctor. That's huge. They did it, and the thing is, they all did something different. We did the scenarios. But it's good we worked through that reputation. Otherwise, they would just, what do we do? And that's not what you want to do on game day. That's a problem. The other thing I should probably say too about sound, and it would happen in here too. My sister-in-law was a nurse on the floor above where we were doing this scenario. She knew we were doing the scenario that day. After our break, I went upstairs and I'm like, hey, how did it sound up there? And she's like, you guys did it? What do you mean we did it? There's dust coming off the ceiling tile. She goes, we didn't hear anything up here because of all the ambient noise, people talking, machines running. That's 223s on short-barreled rifles right below you. You don't hear them. So think about that, proximity. Out here, if I took a heavy book, hard case book, and I walked down that hall about 50 feet and I dropped it, and these doors were open, you guys would have a real difficult time, A, knowing what that sound was from, and B, knowing where it was. Happens in the schools all the time. You start letting rounds go, and it's really tough because of the echo and the surface area and stuff like that. So don't think that you're automatically going to know where the gunshots are coming from. That's not true. So what that leads us to is if you are going to evacuate, you got to visually clear everywhere you're going to go. Another scenario in the school, learning experience for teachers. She's on the second floor and heard the shots. She just opened the door to 20 kids were there just out. The shooter was standing right here. You know, never saw him. We told her, she didn't believe us. She's like, well, I looked. No, you didn't. Videoed it. You didn't look at anything. You know, she'll never make a mistake again. But you have to visually clear where you're going. And if you have 20 people behind you, now you really have to visually clear and start to get them moving by you, and then keep moving and bring up the back end. Because it's a lot of people that cross an open area. I talked about evacuating folks, getting in the way of us. It's really important. And think about that too, about that fleeing vehicle scenario that we could encounter. You guys don't want to get caught in the middle of that. And again, distinguishing friendlies from the shooter. You know, like I said, I know most of the people that work in the city, but when we did Kimberly Clark, I mean, I think we did like 6 sessions of like 30 people. I maybe knew 5% of those people that work in that factory. And I don't remember a lot of them that we dealt with in that training. I would never know who's why they're there and what their role is. And the last one, counter strategies are ridiculous. Statistics show otherwise, over and over and over again. And at the end of the day, I mean, would you rather be hunkered in a corner hoping bad things won't happen, or doing something proactive on the move? That's how I look at it. If I wasn't a cop, if I wasn't armed, I wouldn't be sitting there with my fingers crossed. It's not gonna happen. So you have to start to think like that. So that was the first stage of training, PowerPoint based. I know there's gotta be some questions in here, there always is.
How well do you think the police department is trained and equipped to handle situations like this?
The first part of it, we train every year an active shooter response. Where this gets really difficult is the after effects. For instance, when we had our high school incident, there were, I'm trying to think how many hours that was, 4 hours, 4.5 hours. One of the biggest things we learned about those classrooms is, you know, those teachers need more than anything in their classroom, a bucket with sand in it. You know why? Kids pee a lot. And when teachers are really good about having water, kids pee more because they're thirsty, right? Little things like that you start to learn. The other thing is if people are cut, hit, injured, I think it would be a challenge to get medical help to people as rapid as we'd like to. We have a rescue task force team in Meriden, which is really unique. It's a group of paramedics that signed an MOU with us through Aurora that go out on calls with our tactical team, cross-train SWAT tactics where they don't carry firearms. If you ever heard the term warm zone medicine, they're between warm and hot. I give them credit, they really put themselves in some jams where they go with us. But if they're there, your chances of getting treated are far quicker, but you still have to really think about self-care. I'm a big proponent of tourniquets. Chief Heckel is gonna come talk about some of the bleed issues and mitigating that. I'm sure we're gonna cover that in the future. But tourniquets are the best investment you'll ever make. I mean, they're about $30 and they will save your life. There's a lot of fallacies where people say, well, if I put a tourniquet on my arm, they're gonna cut my arm off. I'm gonna lose it forever. Not true. There's a ton of soldiers that have had tourniquets on for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 hours, and they're still here and their arms still work. So it's really important. That's a really good investment. But you have to really prepare for those things, and unless you bring everybody in and work a scenario where you're dealing with injured people, getting people moved, dealing with traffic, it's hard for us as a department to address all of that. You know, as far as us finding a shooter and dealing with the shooter, I think we're as prepared as we're going to be. We just keep doing update training and hope it never happens. But the other end of the picture is the scary part. Anybody else?
How often have you guys had calls? I know there's a lot of calls that the public is not aware of where you've had barricade issues.
Lots.
Once a year, once a month, and we have, and people are not aware of it.
I know, and I guess there's a reason for that, you know, and I had stats for that, when we talked to council about the Bearcat, but I would say on average probably 2 months between us and the county, because we mutually respond to each other's calls just because of the need. And I always say, like, and you know, I'll tell you this, when I started here the first couple of years, I'd be BSing with my family and friends, and I would start talking about something that happened to us, and I couldn't believe they didn't know about it. And I get mad, I'm like, how do you guys know this stuff? How are you so ignorant? But the longer I did this, I started thinking, you know what, I think that's our job. We're supposed to keep them away from this stuff and not know what's going on, keep it subdued, so it doesn't disrupt their lives. But it happens a lot more than you think. And fortunately, they usually end up harm-free to everybody. That's our goal. You know, having armor, having guys heavily armed and wearing body armor usually has an intimidation factor. And fortunately, that usually works because they see that and they weigh the odds. And when I do that today, I'll just give up. Perfect day. Nobody got hurt. But it does happen a lot.
Are most of them domestic?
What's that?
Are most of them domestic type calls?
A lot of them start that way. Yeah. You know, some of them start as suicidals, and then maybe family or friends intervene and actually escalate the situation. And now we're dealing with somebody who started off wanting to kill themselves, and they want to kill us and everybody else too. You know, we've had people pour gasoline on other people, threaten to set them on fire. It's happened twice, a couple of years apart, just weird stuff like that. But it happens a lot. We just try to keep you all away from that as much as we can.
What can I first, go ahead.
When you're in school teaching these kids, I always tell my grandson, run. But what if the teacher's telling them to sit? Are you telling these kids to use their own brains or listen to the teacher?
I
The
told-
teacher might be panicking.
Yeah, I told my kids the same thing.
Run.
You know, evaluate though. You know, I mean, you can't just run blind because maybe that teacher has information that the shooter's 50 feet away. So whatever that kid does has to be based on observation, and that's going to change as they get older. I mean, face it, if you've got a group of seniors and the teacher says, "Hey, I want you to do this," what are the seniors going to do? What they want to do now because they're trained, right? The younger the kids get, the more they really focus on what that teacher says. That's a really delicate balance. And then if you give that little kid too much to think about, they're just going to freeze. They're going to lock up because they can't process all that. I think the smaller they are, that teacher has to do a really good job of building barricades and fortifying the place that they can. You know, some of it too, when I was talking about friendly walls before, the way walls are built, depending on what they are, that's not going to stop a bullet. That's drywall. You know, if you have a cinder block wall in your classroom, that's a friendly wall. That's the one you get next to because stuff isn't going to go through it. Little things like that. And when we teach the schools, we kind of fish that out. Say, okay, this classroom is going to be a challenge, and then spend extra time with them saying, we really need to develop a way to barricade and place here safely. And that might involve them changing everything in the room to use that concrete wall or that exterior wall. That's really important. That's a tough question. You know, and the older the kids get, the more independent they think, the more they're going to act. So it's tough. It's a tough one to answer to.
What can a person do to try to overcome like a freeze reaction? Like to prepare themselves so that they don't freeze in a situation like that?
Well, that day when that happens, the quickest thing you can do is look peripherally, because under stress you get auditory exclusion, which means your ears just go like this, and you get tunnel vision. So human biology is when you have a threat, your eyes go like this, and they telescope in on the threat. So if you look around, that opens that back up again, and it starts to break open and get rid of that stuff. And the other thing though, long term is training. It's called stress inoculation. You know, if you guys did active shooter training twice a week for a month, you'd start to get really, really good at certain things. But then, most important thing I gotta say about any training for anything, sports, this, whatever, training weaknesses. Find out what you're the worst at. Everyone wants to do what they're best at because they look good doing it, especially if you're in your group, you're like, oh, I'm good, let's watch this. Let's do what we're really bad at. That's what we need to work on. That's really, really important. So that, yeah, breaking the tunnel vision is big. And that's one of the reasons too. Like if you're just running blind out this door, you're looking like this down the hallway. If you look left and right, you just broke that open and now you can see it. It happens to us in pursuits. We always tell our officers, if you're crossing an intersection, look left and right. Otherwise you're looking 8 blocks down and you're not seeing anything around you at all. The other thing in shootings where alert comes in is volume. Because you'll be surprised what you won't hear. You know, we'll video training, we'll video stuff, and guys will say, oh, I didn't hear any of that, but I hear it on video. I didn't hear it in person. That's because your ears were closed. It's auditory exclusion. It's weird how the body works, but you have to break that open. It's a really good question.
So how do you know when to be loud versus quiet?
How do you know what?
When to be loud to throw them off versus being quiet so they don't know when you're there?
If you're evacuating or you're letting someone else know there's a threat there, that's the time to be loud. If you're barricading, that's the time to be quiet. Like in the schools, when they barricade, they'll give like a cue or whatever to start the drill, and you'll just hear chaos in the room for like 30 seconds while they're doing it, and then it's just silent. There's nothing. You know, we'll sit there by the door and wait. You don't hear a rustling of anything. That's how it's supposed to be. Really quiet.
So years ago when dispatch was in City Hall,
Yep.
we had panic buttons in the courtroom and in our office. And then when dispatch moved, we still had the panic button to the front office or to the PD. But then when we remodeled, that was gone. Is there any plan in place that we're gonna have some kind of alert system to City Hall anywhere? That would probably be something that we could bring up definitely to the safety committee. Maybe we can get some irate people. No, I think it's a good idea.
that clerical room there. It's got ballistic glass, but you know what's below it? 2x4s and drywall. You know what's next to it? 2x4s and drywall.
We actually have brick. We have.
You do, you guys do.
Yeah.
We don't.
Um,
So there's a lot of misconceptions and maybe false senses of security sometimes about what stuff is doing and what it isn't.
Well, they put that window in, we asked them to put brick down there too, so.
That's good. That was smart. Anybody else? Is anybody, maybe we should talk about this, who has never used a tourniquet, even practiced with one? Okay, that's something we'll address then. Maybe we can get a bunch of tourniquets for that other stop training.
I think we're sitting next month.
Yeah,
We did.
because that's important, you know, and if you go buy one tonight, the only thing you need to worry about is high and tight. That's why we train it, high and tight. You gotta put that on, it's going to hurt a lot. High and tight, and you know it's tight enough when what stops? Yeah, the bleeding stops, it's tight enough. We always kind of joke this is cop humor, but the bad part about getting shot in the neck is you don't want to put a tourniquet on. You know what I mean? But the rest of your body, that's a really valuable resource. Now I camp a lot with my family. There's tourniquets in our camper because I'm thinking if I'm 3 hours away from home in the middle of PFE and somebody gets a bleed, what am I gonna do? You know, it's important.
We trained in first aid as well as our fire department with EMS. So, you know, if there's issues, you know, I thought we should always have some kind of first aid training. So if somebody gets injured, we have something on the spot.
Yeah.
I didn't know if PD was trained on that as well.
Well, I think what's gonna come out of that training that we were talking about is there's probably gonna be some centralized locations of where extra tourniquets are needed, like clotting gauze and stuff like that. I mean, if nobody's ever seen clotting gauze, it's kind of gross how it works, but it works really well. They used to have it in powder in a sponge form. It actually cauterizes the wound when it contacts blood. It literally burns itself in, which is really good because it stops the bleed, but it has to be surgically removed. Like it's got to be by a really advanced team that can cut that away because as soon as they cut it away, the bleed's gonna start again. I'd recommend that we get some of that. It's really cheap insurance and it lasts, I think, 5 years shelf life if you don't get it wet. But for direct pressure bleeds, I mean, and they're like in squares. They look like gauze, but they're thicker and they're kind of sticky. Putting that on a bleed works really, really well. And I think, you know, we could work with our paramedics to get some of that too, but stuff like that to be in a location where everyone knows would be really important.
Are there any plans to like go to different buildings like City Hall in your area?
I'd like to do that as
Yeah.
long as we can. Take this to the next level to work in your workplaces because that's where, you know, some people learn by seeing, some people learn by doing. Usually a combination of both is best. So if we go to your work areas and move through those areas and give you some challenges, you'll start to rethink things a little bit. For instance, I mean, my wife got put in a new office over above the courthouse. Literally, they wanted her back to the door in a little cubicle office on a second floor. And I walked in, I was like, oh, no, this isn't gonna work, you know what I mean? And she knew right away I was gonna blow up when I saw that, I'm like, who designed this? But maximizing space, but you never wanna have it back to the door, ever. It's a big deal. But no, that's a good question. I mean, I hope we can work something out in the future and document that because what it's actually caused the schools to do is change how they do things in their room. And you really start to think about things differently. And part of that is just the mental awareness too. You know, being complacent will encourage you to freeze. Having some stuff in your brain prepared for a day like that gets you moving quicker. And if you have things tactically, you know, in your room, like if you have a really heavy paperweight and a stapler that are within reach, that's really good. You have to hit somebody with it. Fire extinguishers are a big deal. The schools all move their fire extinguishers from where they used to be, you know, and Chief Hackle would be like, ugh, I said this, but you know I'm gonna say it anyway. So fire extinguisher is used for putting out fires. It is also really effective at spraying somebody's face and hit them in the head with it, because it works. If you've got a shooter, you disrupt their visual ability, their shooting platform, and the rest of the shell becomes a weapon. To me, that's what a fire extinguisher also is. And the teachers in schools started to do that too. They bought a whole bunch more, and they have really interesting places. to some people, it's like, is that paranoia? Is that disturbed lines of thinking? I don't think so, because these aren't limited occurrences. These are just happening over and over and over again. So statistically, how long can we dodge that happening here? We gotta address it.
In any of those cases, were there, signs that they should have seen? I mean, do these people just come out of nowhere, or were they, you know, like, if there was a student that they're making threats and they were
Yeah.
ignored?
So here's the scary part, and they call that leakage of information. Like 75 or 80% of every school shooter and commercial shooter has told at least one person. Every single one. And I think 50% have told up to 3 people. And nobody has come forward with that stuff. A lot of it is they don't take the person seriously. They want to remain anonymous because they don't want to be a victim of the shooter. Let me give you an example. One of the guys that got it, I think it was the Florida shooting, he emulated the Columbine guys. So during his high school senior spring break, think about this now, has his mom drive him to Columbine High School, gets a picture in front of it, drives him to where one of the Columbine shooters worked, got a picture there. Then had his mom bring him to the store to buy a trench coat, just like the one of the shooters wore. And they got home the day later, he kills his mom and goes on a shooting spree at school. Do you think there were any flags? You know? But what if she doesn't want to believe? It can't be he's doing this. It's a phase. You know, those were a bunch of red flags, and he killed her so she didn't have to observe what he was about to do.
So how seriously, like, I call you up and say, Patty said she's gonna go shoot out Jack's store. How seriously do you take anonymous calls like that?
Real serious. We had one not too long ago that involved 3 school districts in 2 states. I can't say too much about it, but that night before supper was on the table, that kid's parents had representatives from 3 different places saying, hey, we need to talk. And the parents had no idea what was going on because they hadn't been monitoring any of the social media. So they're gonna get attention, and the school addresses it a little differently than we do the next day. You know, we're more worried about right now of that. There's weapon seizures involved. You know, even if the dad or mom had nothing to do with it, if they've got a gun, that's going to evidence until we know that that kid or those kids are a threat. And that really makes them waves, but sorry, we can't afford to have that. Usually the schools kind of have like a heightened security thing the next day. They'll do maybe more diligent bag checks than they did. I'm sure that kids involved will be suspended, maybe expelled until they know it's factual or not. But talking about the parent thing, more often than not, when we let the parents know something like this is going on, and this has to do with a lot like bullying, kid porn stuff, you name it. The first time the parent finds out what was going on social media is either when we tell them, or a parent of another kid that knew about it tells them. They have no idea. They have no idea. And that's scary. You know what I mean? So the fact that their kids could be escalating, and then they start to look at their history, their kids might have been making vague threats for months. No idea. So really, really caution you to watch social media really, really closely. There's warning signs there. And like I said, the leakage there, I mean, imagine this, how can these kids have bedrooms where they have bulletin boards, all active shooter clippings out, and pictures, and the parents never, I didn't know that was in the bedroom. Do you ever walk in there? You know what I mean? It is what it is, but it's just put in the time, you know, and we tell people too, like, force us, and this falls on us. If anybody in here, or any, you know anybody that does a complaint of something like that, it doesn't get feedback in that loop of what happened, that falls on us, and force us, call us, and say, hey, we reported this to you, what did you do about it, what happened? On some juvenile stuff, we have to dance around to find line, but if the original caller doesn't have positive reinforcement that anything happened, they're dissatisfied and they're never gonna call again. because they're gonna say, well, they didn't do anything anyway, right? The problem is, a lot of times something did happen, but we never let the first person in line know that something happened, so then their takeaway is, well, that was stupid, that was a waste of time. So that falls on us. That's where a situation where, don't be shy, bang on some doors and say, hey, what's going on with this? That's a fair question. You know, and if somebody doesn't give you the answer you want, move up, because that has to be answered. We're accountable for